And I am equally happy that so many of you are here, and maybe you have read some or most of the novel. And I'm really looking forward to questions and conversation with you. But I wanted to ask Dr. Rathore if you did want to say a few words, actually might be more than a few words, but a kind of introduction to the creative process. I think that's something you had asked me to do.
Yes,
This is
there is an echo somewhere. Okay. Uh,
which
Dr.
I'd be
Nandini, see, as I said, when I first read Love's Garden, what I was just discussing with Parminder here also, that what caught my eye was that I have worked extensively on British Raj, because I worked on the rape metaphor in E.M. Foster, Ruth Jabwala, and Paul Scott. So I have been reading the history and the fiction and the non-fiction on the British Raj and close to independence. But your novel is so different, I would say. That's what I mentioned in my email also. The narrative technique, the language, I'll ask you questions about it after you tell us. So first thing which I really want to know, and that's what I asked you, that what the thought that went behind it, and the creative process that brought out this novel. I'm definitely sure that your roots in India, and you're from the eastern side, and Odisha and Calcutta is the setting of this novel as well. And you're being a woman and you're working with the South Asian women in America. And again, your concerns regarding these things must have gone into the uh, writing of this novel. So I really wish to know more about it.
Thank you. I will do my best to talk about it. First of all, in terms of my background, I also have written about Indian history and colonialism as a scholar, and I focused a lot on women's the aspects of that history where women are represented, though of course in the early days women were not representing themselves. So that's been part of the hinterland for my thinking about the novel, and beginning to sort of plan or plot a sort of story. But I really do have to say that the real impetus in many ways for the story is my own family. And some of the stories that I've heard, actually, not sure how many of them are apocryphal. Some of them probably are, or at least embroidered, but almost along the plot line and the timeline of Love's Garden, my family, mostly in Calcutta, kind of underwent similar kinds of brushes with the Raj. And certainly there were men like Sir Naren Mitra or Mitta who were lackeys of the British. And on the other hand, we had these sort of domestic stories about very pesky women, very feisty women who, in spite of the fact that they basically had to stay home, or they were, the wives of big men, and they went to these parties with the British and just sort of stood in, were expected to stand by the side and look pretty and, not make much conversation. In spite of that, I've heard of some of my foremothers kind of just taking it on, even though they knew very little English. They were just going to have a part in the conversation. So as much as we laughed about that, I also thought about what it took to do that. Um, I actually had prepared a kind of a talk with, I could have shared the screen with you, and it's a little bit more organized, but I can also just address it the way you're asking me the question, whatever you want me to do. I don't know how much time I have, so.
We are very much okay with the time, because here it's early morning, and we would really like to listen to you, Dr. Nandini. So whichever way you feel comfortable, please go ahead.
Okay. So I think in the interest of being more focused, I should maybe share my thoughts with you. So I would like to share the screen and I'll be reading along with, but you can also follow the words. And then there are some images that I hoping will make the talk come more alive. So if that's okay, then I'm going to share the screen right now. Okay, thank you. Oh, you have disabled the attendee screen sharing. I, that's what the message says, which is okay. I mean, we
No,
can
it's
just,
okay. I'll make you the host and you'll be able to share the screen. I think
okay.
that should do it.
You
Let
are
me see.
far more adept with technology than I am. By all means, yes.
This is COVID's, I think, blessing, I would
Yes,
say.
yes. We've had to learn things.
See, I made you the co-host. See if you're able to share screen
Okay,
now.
let me see. Yes, I can share the screen now. So thank you so much. And I will get started, but this is not a very long talk. The reason why I wanted to give this talk is that I thought about the questions Dr. Rathor had posed to me when she asked me to do this. And I do have some concrete things to say. Besides, there are these images that I think will sort of illuminate the background and also my writing process. If you see them while I'm giving you the sort of gist of my thoughts about what went into writing this novel. So, without further ado, I'm just going to share that. So, I called it the creative process behind writing Love's Garden, a work of historical fiction. Um, When I began writing Love's Garden almost 15 years ago, and of course I put it aside many, many times, I was undergoing a personal self understanding process that I would call an archaeology of myself. This process took me back to the nebulous records of my family history, as I just said. As I was looking for answers to my own puzzles, I started remembering old family stories, many of them involving foremothers I'd never met. That's how Love's Garden started. In an attempt to invoke those powerful voices and figures and invite them into my felt reality, almost as soothsayers or wise guides. And this archaeology of myself will probably always remain some part of my writing process, including in the novel that I'm working on now called Homeland Blues. So I wanted to show you an image of a family that was related to my family. To this day, I do not know who they are, but my mother was very attached to this family and this photo. And I know it was a relative that had, was wealthy, lived in Calcutta, had a great mansion, probably was a kind of Sir Norrin type of character. And so I've always thought of this portrait as the kind of model for my characters, for the Mitter family. Um, so that's something to show you that has really actually informed my envisioning of the characters in my novel. You know, the aristocrat, basically the elite of colonial Calcutta. Historical research was, of course, inevitable for Love's Garden. I think the past is radically different and inaccessible, while also containing things that are timeless. And this was a sense of my material that came over me very quickly as I researched Love's Garden. I'm a World War history buff, though not a war buff. And Love's Garden is about dramatic, heady, and complicated times when forbidden love, strange political alliances, and cross race liaisons were possible because of wartime mentality in particular. I have a couple of images of Calcutta. So this is a well-known bakery cafe that still exists. It's not as prominent as before. It was called Furpos, and it was in Chowringhee, Calcutta, where a lot of the sort of upper class action in my novel takes place or refers to. So most of Lady Mitter's life and the kinds of shops she goes to and the kinds of places she shops at, as well as where the British largely hang out, British and Americans, would be places like these. And then this is an image of Calcutta in around that time, maybe a little bit earlier, but you see that it was quite the grand colonial city, rather different from what it looks like these days. War always upturns lives, but there was an unprecedented cross pollination of desires and duties in 20th century India, the jewel in the British crown, where anti colonial nationalism had to muscle its own separate cause into the halls and council chambers of anti fascist resistance. These flows of unruly and sometimes forbidden desires heighten. I'm sorry, there's a lot of background noise. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Okay. These
Girls, please keep yourself muted.
these flows of unruly and sometimes forbidden desires, of course, heighten the unrest of India's already turbulent Quit India nationalist movement, which I'm sure you've all know of. There's just an image of Gandhi in 1942. A good chunk of Love's Garden came to be set in that time and was mapped along important moments in my own family saga. So, one of the ways of imagining this world for me literally was to plot the novel along certain momentous years or decades that I knew of that had involved members of my family. And this is actually kind of a model for the sort of house that uh, actually members of my family had in old Calcutta. We don't have it anymore. But this would be the kind of house probably where the Mitters would live in very posh Alipur in Calcutta. But I had to do an enormous amount of research, reading both scholarly and creative works about India during the wars and the struggle for independence. And I did draw upon my own scholarship. And that includes writing about the South Asian partition, of course, which, as you might know, was a line cut across not only India's geography, but India's history, India's timeline in ways that affect central characters in my novel, as you might also know. And we know these images of what people did to people. Nothing would be the same again. Communities clashed, uh, violence and unbelievable carnage occurred on both sides of the line that Cyril Radcliffe drew without knowing anything about India. And cities and communities were ruined during this time because of the violence. So that's a kind of backstory about the historical context. But in some ways, I can sum up my creative process as following this: write what you want to know or wish you knew, even if you don't yet know it. That said, as to process and practice, I have other routines, but as a creative writer, not really. I feel suffocated by rules like get up and write 3 pages every morning. That might be great for other writers, they just don't work for me. Maybe I'm too much of a Bengali that way, kind of, laid back and fond of adda and cha and all that kind of stuff. But more specifically, I write whenever or as soon as possible I get an idea. I always try to write it down. Even if it's just a rudiment, just a germ, I try to write it down. Or even when a sentence or image crops up in my head, which is entirely impractical because I have other things to do, but I do make my best effort to write things down. I don't write every morning, every evening, or any of that sort of thing. I write when I can, and also I write when I must. There are times I know I must, because if I don't do it now, I will miss something very important and it'll never come back to me again. So sometimes it's about a place. I like to write when I'm in a coffee shop or a bookstore, and of course, during retreats or writing residencies when that's what I'm supposed to do. Um, Few other ideas about the process of Love's Garden in particular as historical fiction. First, imagine, of course, that's the poetry part. But then research, research, research. That's the history part. Write what you didn't know, and your own wonder at discovery will show in your writing. So, for my novel, it was when my reading led me to stories about soldiers of the so named Forgotten Army in the China, Burma, or Eastern theater of World War II, that I really had a sluice of empathy open in me, and it lifted the ship of my story. Not
Please,
something
family.
I, just a few images of wartime Calcutta. This is a Japanese Mitsubishi bomber called the Sally, of all things. Uh, he actually appeared frequently in the skies of Calcutta during 1942 and 43 when our hero Roderick is valiantly protecting or trying to protect Calcutta. There was a little bit of bombing and nothing as bad as had been expected, but they certainly were uh, omens of terror. Um, Soldiers, American and British, in the streets of Calcutta at the time. Second, think about connections and find story ideas in discordance as opposed to connection. Look for dominant narratives, then find the gaps and the fissures in them. So I was having trouble with the plot at one point because of the span, because it's about 100 years, well, about 70 years, which is a long time in history and in Indian history where so much happened during that time. So I sometimes couldn't see the larger canvas because my impetus had been starting with my family, with myself. I couldn't see the wider stakes that could make the story meaningful for other people, a wider appeal. So at some point, I just had to leave my navel gazing and look into the history of the city of Calcutta, and especially during the war. And I've said some of my family members were involved. Once I began reading up on Calcutta in the 30s and 40s, I learned about one particular British RAF pilot who played a central role in defending Calcutta from Japanese bombing. I think he shot down 3 Sallies and became a beloved figure in the city despite being one of the master race. And he was British. And this provided me a character, as you probably know who that is, in Love's Garden, who provides a hook to hang the stories of several women characters. This man, Maurice Spring, he was actually shot down and his body was never found. But he's kind of my inspiration for thinking about the lives of soldiers in Calcutta during the war and how much other people were involved with them. Also, the Japanese American soldier Amherst Buck, he's imagined from a contingent of soldiers that were in Burma and Malaysia, not India, but kind of guarding the southeast part of the battlefront against the Japanese with the help of the Chinese. So look around at intersections as well as up the long vanishing point of the highway called denouement. Take detours and find yourself making unexpected discoveries that become clues and connections, and sometimes, as for me, templates. Finally, read the classics and the contemporaries in equal measure. I've been asked about writer's block. I don't know what the solution is. Sometimes I stop writing and just read for a while. Sometimes I have dreams actually that have inspired my writing. Um, Most of the connections are not straightforward cognitive trajectories, but they're like loops and strings. And I think this is what my novel structure is like. It is like things keep looping back or they string into each other or one another. But you don't necessarily have to, tear them apart and look at all the provenance. They should come together in a kind of organic whole because of the style of the storytelling. I also watch a lot of film, and I think film actually impacts some of my writing style. In fact, some of the reviews of my novel have said it is very cinematic. I'm waiting for the Hollywood or Bollywood director to come along and ask for a script from me. Um, that's a joke. But basically, this is what I do. Sometimes when the going gets tough, the tough have to get going. And then the only way to write is to sit down and write. As William Wordsworth said, to begin, begin. And that is my little prepared speech. So I am happy to talk more, or I'm happy to open this up to questions, answers, comments, anything you want.
Mm, uh, the point with which you ended, there are two things which striked me quite a bit. One, as you narrate, yes, as you said, there is the research, the history, everything shows in the work. I don't believe that there is any issue that you have left out which India
Oh,
was
I'm
facing at
sure
that
there are
time.
more. But
Right from the religious strife to the social conditions to the world wars, uh, to the gender equations, to education, lack of it, and the Eurasians or Anglo Indians here, and their dilemma. And it is there somewhere or the other, it is there. But two things really strike me. One was the structure, as you said, that it is a linear structure, but again and again we go back and forth. And if I may use the word epiphany, certain things they keep again and again, and there is a certain mystery to it which is quite characteristic of India as well. Right in the beginning, we know that Saroj has, Munni has been left behind, and there is something. Then, after a few pages, we come to know that Saroj was waiting for the thing that Munni would bring. But again, the thing is not
yeah,
mentioned. And I really, I had the patience to just wait till you revealed it, what that thing is. And again, those golden anklets. So you don't immediately reveal, but it is not even that you are hiding. That doesn't come across. It is just that a sentence is there, and we know that it is going to be very significant. And again, we come back to it. So that is, that technique there. I feel there is a certain, it adds to, it brings it to a, it makes it a complete whole. And another very, very, characteristic thing was the tense form that you have used, the present indefinite. You use she says and she goes, and somewhere very for few lines there'll be the past tense will be there, and how you have juxtaposed the two, and everything is happening. It is not a story of the past. If I just take the stories of the women, the mother, daughter, and so beautifully the foster child and everything there, and remove it from this backdrop, take it to some other setting, they're as real. They would be as real there also. It is every time, I was again and again, I was reminded while reading the novel that the, the use of this tense, that it is happening right now. It is not like somewhere we are in 1898 or we are in 1916, and once you mentioned that in 1977 this is going to happen. So but it is happening right now. So these two things, they struck me. So now I know it is a very, very conscious decision, but I would like you to elaborate on this.
so yeah, and I mean the technique is called slow release. You don't give all the information right away, but you try to hook the reader with a mystery or some kind of undisclosed material. Now, you have to keep reminding the reader through the narrative, though, that something is still in the offing. You can't just kind of abandon that, which is why Saroj comes back into the story several times when she's in the village. She's got nothing to do with Calcutta, but also through her daughter's recollection of her. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize was the importance of the mother daughter relationships and the care or lack of care that women provided other women in all time, but certainly in this story too. So, yes, that kind of leaving little traces, like a little, Hansel and Gretel kind of breadcrumbs along the way, was something I had to work hard on because I hadn't written a historical novel before. And it took many iterations before I could figure out how to tell the story without giving too much away, but taking the reader with me. The other thing that you said is, I think you mentioned motifs or metaphors, but I was thinking of motifs. So some motifs had to be repeated, like fire is an essential motif because of what we find out at the end, and the fact that Saroj blames herself for not having taken the more, I guess, the more according to patriarchy, the more
Easy.
moral route.
Mm.
Yeah, and instead striking out for herself and saying, I want to live and I want to. And it's very sad that the main reason for her living actually is lost, and it traumatizes her for the rest of her life. But the fire thing had to keep coming back. There had to be references to her thinking about fire and the fire bombing of Calcutta, those kinds of things. And the other thing you said, as actually you're telling me how I wrote the novel, because you're saying it much better than I could. uh, there are archetypes in the novel, and there are those almost fairy tale like characters, like the evil stepmother, except she's the uh, damaged mother. She's not evil or a stepmother. The kind of gruff patriarch, almost like a gothic tale in the household of the Mitters. Um, the story of taking care of children who are not your own, but whom you get to love as much. So these were the archetypes, I think, that did influence the storytelling. I do have a generational sense of family and history. So I like to look at things in large swaths, in large sweeps. You were saying about Jhumpa and Chitra writing very differently. They indeed write very differently. They don't write history. Well, Chitra does, but she doesn't do the multi-character epic plot kind of thing. I do the epic plot kind of thing. So I have many people in the novel and many times and meetings between them that connect the story and the characters to each other. I couldn't figure out any other way to write this novel. I mean, I wouldn't have given each character a kind of voice. I think that's a very modern thing, and I felt like that wouldn't suit what I wanted to convey through the story. So these are some of the things that, yeah, I mean, I do agree that I had. Um,
Believe that the story, sorry for interrupting, but I believe that the story, though it goes with the Prem, but uh, it is as much a story of Prem as of Saroj, as of Kanan. Even though we don't go very far with Kanan, but it is Love's Garden. When I first came across the two names, and it opened up. Okay, it's Prem and Kanan there, and
Wow, you were
then.
being very perceptive. I don't think anyone else has said that to me. I mean, that is
I'll write a
exactly
paper on this.
that's exactly why
Yeah.
the novel is called Love's Garden, because of their names. And so that female friendship at the beginning, even though it goes bad, is at the heart of the story.
Huh.
Stories about all, not only women supporting each other, but sometimes unwittingly abandoning each other because they have no choice. I mean, Kanun has to get married. There's nothing else she can do. And all the kind of tomboyish, we're always going to live together and have our families together is just a dream. But it's a beautiful dream. And so that's why I wanted the novel to reflect that core friendship, that, women's friendship that begins everything.
Yes, and I was reading the reviews, and yes, some of the reviewers, they find that there's too much of misery, and there's that the happy living happily ever after kind of thing. It is not happening there. But I read the reviews before I read the book. But when
Uh-huh.
I read the book,
I'm
I don't
surprised you read the book in that case.
I didn't find, okay, yes, it is difficult. The life there is difficult, and the dreams are not coming true and all. But I find the women, each one of them, okay, Saroj, yes, she, because she cannot get over that mindset that she didn't do the right thing, and something which has been transferred from generations from one to the other, that performing sati would have been the good choice, good option. And but the women, they all do what is best suited to that situation. And I don't find the ending at all depressing. The ending, it has a very sublime kind of effect. I would really like you to speak on that.
I am glad you say that because, yes, there have been reviews that say things like this is relentlessly depressing. And part of the answer to that is, yeah, it was a pretty relentlessly depressing time for a lot of women, especially. So, it's not a fairy tale, it is a tragedy in some ways, but with a bittersweet ending. So, the ending being a letter from Lillian, who's long gone from the story, written to Prem, is another, maybe you can call it an epiphany, is another way of recognizing that in the end, women see into each other's hearts in ways that men
Mm,
may not be able to see.
mm,
And that kind of basic understanding and empathy for each other is what keeps things going, literally, even families or communities.
mm,
And women either do or are obliged to do the emotional work for that. So when both of them have lost their children, but they have survived, for Lillian to reach out again and you know and acknowledge the boon, the gift that Prem did give her. It's a very unusual thing to do. In fact,
mm.
I thought nobody's going to believe this, but then I thought, well, I'm sure someone did it. So, so that's very. And the other thing I wanted to convey is the possibility of transcending national boundaries of race, of color, and coming together with women or people who are very different from you and may even be perceived as enemies. But they're enemies because politics has done that, not because the women said, okay, I'm not gonna, like you because you're from India or from England. It's history. It's what has happened beyond the women's control. So mostly, I think that's what I have to say about the ending. But
Yes.
yeah,
And
I did want that ending to both have a tragic after note, but at the same time end with an affirmation of something positive, the friendship and the possibility of hope and going on in spite of the terrible thing. I mean, if you think about the partition, that's what, I mean, most women couldn't do it, but that's what some people had to do. They just had to keep going on, even though they kept silent about it. So that's why.
uh, and the language of the novel, and the descriptions and all, I think I'll leave it to the students because they must be there with some questions. So Palak, you can go ahead and ask what you want.
Yes, ma'am. A very
Hi.
good evening, Nandini ma'am, and very good morning to all the teachers and my fellow students. It has been my honor to come across this book and go through the content that was provided by Nandini ma'am, and the beautiful metaphors and the language and diction. It was an amazing journey. And so I would like to ask something from Nandini ma'am. Um, Upon reading the book, I came across few nuances. And ma'am, do you see Lady Prem Mittal residing with Mr. Jagat Pandey and Sham Pyari and Kanan? like in an alternate universe? Like, do you ever see them being in that happy state?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think it's the unfulfillment of that is a kind of persistent tragic thread throughout the story. I didn't consciously think that, yeah, we could have seen a kind of utopic alternative, because in practical terms, that could not be an alternative. Um, but I think, as you meant, I mean, sometimes, writers see things about their own work when the reader tells them something. And that's what you're just telling me, that yeah, it can be seen as that it might have been, which is somehow more comforting than it could never be. So just the idea, that, I mean, even in Calcutta, Prem and Jagat were so close, but Prem never read any of the, local papers, and the big statesmen didn't talk about Hindi film or Bengali film, so she didn't know. So that kind of just missing utopia, missing the chance to find happiness, is at the heart of the novel. So yes, now I see them as a kind of alternative universe, and that's thanks to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I would like to ask one more question.
Sure.
Um, Ma'am, during the times of revolt against the British rule, did Prem ever felt like going against her husband, who was obviously following British? And did that hatred ever stem from her, that she wants to support the nationalists, she wants to support her, countrymen, and the duality and the paradox prevailing in her emotions, did it ever hinder her choices or affect her health afterwards when she reached the village? Or was it like she was able to go over it, like she was able to not feel guilty about it? Did she ever feel that way?
I think specifically about her husband, whom we see her disagreeing with many times in the novel, even though she kind of doesn't have his gravitas, doesn't have his, authority. But we do see her being rebellious and saying, you're a lackey, you're a servant of the British, if not in so many words. In terms of what would happen to her afterwards when she gets to the village, I think she wouldn't be guilty. I think she would have kind of buried the past and the bad with the good. But I also think that her mojo, if I may use that word, is to look forward. And also, it's extremely important for her survival and for Roma's survival that she does look forward. There is, not much to look back to. So, no, I don't think Prem would apologize for what she felt, or, ways in which her nationalism clashed with her husband's love for the British.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Anybody else? Avantika, Prapti, Tavishi. Okay. I have a question here. We find Prem always taking the right decision with the
Yeah.
best one. See, she loses a child, and she has a horrifying time when she realizes what is going to happen to Kanan and Kanan's husband. She's already been through that, and as you said, she's always looking forward. I mean, she's too centered a person. She's always doing the right thing. And then Lillian and Prem trusting each other. Lillian leaving the child with Prem, and the way they trust each other, and the way Prem is able to accept the child. I mean, it is what when we talk about women empowerment, when we talk about sisterhood, I think this is what it is. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, exactly. It is sisterhood. I wanted to suggest through the novel that women's loyalty to each other, when it is there, is far stronger than their bonds to men, even if they do love the men, and of course they love the men, their sons, their husbands, etc. But the power of women's faith in each other almost holds up the world. That's kind of how I feel. And so I did want to focus several times. And the Kanan thing is a bit of a foreshadowing of what happens with Lillian, that, Prem finds another woman whose troubles she can take on as much as possible and whom she can help, partly because she couldn't help Kanan. When she is in a position to help someone like Lillian, she chooses to do that. It's her choice. And I never intended to suggest that she felt forced or compelled in any way. I see it as a complete exercise of her agency as a woman. So yes, yeah, the Lillian thing is very much a part of that sisterhood concept through the novel. Yeah.
That is also across cultures, that too across cultures.
And
And
there were friendships like that between Indian women and English women. I mean, they did sometimes recognize that the reason they were pitted against each other was because their men were pitting themselves against each other. And it was a logic of empire. There was not much they could do. But if they individually knew one another, there were many friendships actually between Indian and English women. That's another thing I found out. So,
and
yeah.
especially during war times or during times like the partition in India, we have got numerous anecdotes and stories where it's women who helped each other across religion, across boundaries. They are the ones who helped
Yeah,
each other. And without, even asking which religion you belong to, they did it.
that's
Uh,
absolutely
so
right.
that
Yeah, that's a very good comparison.
it's not something new or it's not something unbelievable. It is there. Every time something good has happened or something bad has happened, as during war times or any turbulence is there, it's women who help each other out. So even during pandemic, when we ask the neighbors if they had the groceries, it's the women who reach out to each other.
Yeah, yeah,
And yes, they
yeah.
history has shown that women are mentally stronger, but it comes out really well in the novel. And here I would like to ask you this, that recently we were at a conference, and where one of our very stalwarts here in literature, one Professor Dhaya, he said that a fiction, a story, or a novel cannot be taken as a social or a historical document. So, but nowadays we look for history, we read partition through the novels, we read about social conditions and everything through fiction, and now even through web series and through films. That's how we look back. So, what would you like to say about this?
About the other professor's comment, I think I would interpret that as meaning that official history cannot be laced with imagination. It has to kind of follow either the course of actual events or the conventions about reporting about actual events. But remember, and I don't particularly want to lean on a Greek philosopher for this, but I've always thought about it that Aristotle always said that poetry is truer than history. Poetry is about what should be rather than history, which is a chronicle of things that happen. I also think that that's kind of a way of thinking about fiction and historical fiction. First of all, it's not history. I'm not trying to write history. I'm writing historical fiction, and that's clearly, demonstrated, and it's claimed. But am I not writing about history? Yeah, I think I am still writing about history. I mean, I'm a historian too, in a way, but with that difference. My job is not to chronicle events that happened. My job is to chronicle events that either might have happened and were never talked about, or, as in the other sense we talked about, it would have been good if they had happened. That is what we would want to have happen. So that's what I would say about that. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of doubt about writing historical fiction because editors say, well, we have to fact check everything. And sometimes, they'll say, oh, I'm not able to do the fact checking, so I don't want the book. That's happened to me. But I mean, you have to be responsible about doing your research. But I think then you do have the authority to imagine a past, um, you know, through the past that you know about.
Here, I would like to add that while reading Love's Garden, another thing that struck me was the authenticity of the facts.
Yeah.
And yes, the novel and the facts, majorly they are based in Northeast. And now, after seeing your presentation and when you spoke about it, I realized you know area, the space so well, and
Yeah.
it has
Eat.
come from personal experiences. So I can understand it better, and definitely I'm going to reread it
Oh my
to
goodness.
to see, yes, how it is that because you know the nooks and corners of Kolkata so well, that you have been able to present it so many times in novels and especially movies. You find that the director has misinterpreted certain things or misrepresented certain things. And here I would like to add that we are here in the north, the Punjab, the another area which was so much uh, affected by the partition. और मैं समझती हूँ, I think you can understand Hindi as well, Nandini. So if
Yeah.
I may continue with that, because my Punjabi is not that good, and we have got we have got the Punjabi and the Hindi departments also here. और हमारे जो teachers हैं और students हैं वो बहुत ज़्यादा पंजाबी speaking हैं, और
I
उन्होंने
don't speak Hindi fluently, but I understand everything
अंडरस्टैंड,
you
या
say.
सो
Yeah.
आई वुड रियली, मैं चाहूंगी कि हमारे साथ है डॉक्टर पुष्पिंदर स्याल, पुष्पिंदर पाल कौर हमारे मैम है। पुष्पिंदर मैम इज हेयर, शी इज हेड ऑफ द डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ पंजाबी। और पुष्पिंदर मैम, जैसे हमने ये सब बातचीत करी, तो आपको जरूर लगा होगा कि ये जब हम बात कह रहे हैं कि औरतों ने औरतों का बहुत सारा साथ दिया, तो ये आपके पंजाबी लिटरेचर में भी ये चीज बहुत ज्यादा होगी पार्टीशन के टाइम पे स्पेशली। तो आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे पुष्पिंदर मैम इस पे?
हाँ जी, औरत औरत दी मित्र भी है और औरत औरत दी दुश्मन भी है, पर ਇੱਥੇ ਮਿੱਤਰਤਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹਾਈਲਾਈਟਡ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਮਨ ਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਗਾਰਡਨ ਹੈ। ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ your mind is a garden, your thoughts are the seeds, ठीक है
Yeah.
ना। तो इस
That's
करके है कि
beautiful.
उसमें बहुत अच्छी चीजें हम अगर बीजे तो बहुत अच्छे फूल आ सकते हैं, जिनकी महक के साथ जो है हमारा जो समाज है, हमारी सोसाइटी है, वो खुशनुमा हो सकती है, ठीक है ना। उसमें
बिल्कुल।
अपने आप ही भले अच्छे रंग भर सकते हैं, और
हम्म,
वो रंग हमेशा खुशियों के होते हैं,
तो
ठीक है ना।
देखो
तो ये
मैम,
बहुत अच्छा आप अपना नावल लिख रहे हो, जिसमें पूरी सोसाइटी को इन्वॉल्व आपने किया हुआ है। वो आपका मन है कि आपका नजरिया वो अच्छा है, तो इसलिए आप अच्छे ढंग से उन सब चीजों को परो लेते हो,
I'm very
ठीक है।
honored.
सी,
ये ठीक है ना।
हाँ, तो
हाँ,
बहुत ही सुंदर
बाबा जी
आपने
ब्लेस।
बिल्कुल नया एक एस्पेक्ट दिया है कि वो जब वो ट्रस्ट का और सिस्टरहुड के बीज डाले जाएंगे ना, तभी तो लव्स गार्डन भी हो पाएगा। और द वे,
वही है ना कि वो हमारी थॉट्स हैं कि उसमें हम क्या बीजना चाहते हैं, ठीक है ना।
Yeah.
तो
The
इसलिए हम
mind is a
अच्छे
garden.
समाज में रहेंगे, अच्छी फैमिली में रहेंगे, अच्छी सोसाइटी में रहेंगे। ये हमारा अपना नजरिया है कि हम उस चीजों में से किसको चुनते हैं। भले जिंदगी में कांटे भी हों, पर एक खुशबू जो है वो हमारे जहन में हमेशा रहती है, जिससे हम दूसरों को खुशबू दे सकें, खुशी दे सकें, उनकी जिंदगी के कांटों को हम चुन सकें और उसको साइड पे कर सकें। वो प्यार ही है, वो जो सब चीजों को जड़ा के सींचता है, ठीक है ना।
बिल्कुल।
चलो, गॉड ब्लेस यू।
And Pushpinder ma'am is a spiritual seeker, so her blessings always make everything very successful. So thank you so much, ma'am. Aapke blessings mil gaye. So I
I
think
feel very honored and blessed indeed.
yes, and I, I think we just want to hear more and more from you, Professor Nandini, and definitely I'm going to write a paper on Love's Garden, and I'll send it to you. That would be, I think that would uh, bring to the author so many things which the readers have seen, which
I
maybe the
know.
author
I
also.
am learning things about my novel that I didn't know listening to
Yes.
you, which is actually lovely because I cannot see all of the novel. I'm too close to it and all
Yes,
that.
yes.
But my reader will find things that I won't
Mm,
even know
mm.
about. So I
Okay.
appreciate that very much. Do
So,
any of the students have other questions? I know there
yeah,
are about,
like,
but
students, do you have anything? Would you like to comment? You can comment in Hindi, in Punjabi, whichever language you are comfortable with. That's fine. Muskan, go ahead.
Good morning, ma'am. It is my great honor to speak in front of you. I really love the book. And
thank
actually, you also mentioned about actually a mother-daughter relationship is kind of emotional relationship. So,
you.
how did you first realize you wanted to write about this? And secondly, you also mentioned about a Prem's child, you know, who died. So
Mhm.
it was also the one of the reason, so that Prem could also know about the feeling of being mother.
Mhm. Sure, and about loss, because Saroja's primary, I guess, her experience of life is of having lost the thing that was most important to her. So, in some ways, I do, again, as you point out, I see it better. I do see that the incident of Prem's first child, I mean, we don't even know if it died. We don't know. And I had no intention of
Yeah.
answering that question. But it is a way for her to understand something about her mother, though she doesn't know that until her mother dies. But when her mother dies, I think she does understand more and forgive her mother maybe a little bit, knowing that her mother had a similar trauma. Why did I write about mother-daughter relationships? Because I think they're very important. And I always think about them. And I have a son, but I do think that the mother daughter relationship is one of the most fundamental, basic human relationships. And men's stories talk about men and talk about, patriarchy and talk about heroes and um, heroic fathers, heroic men, but there aren't many women's stories that talk about, the relationship of mother and daughter as the central problem, even if you want to call it that. I didn't think of all this consciously, but this is what I think unconsciously I was thinking of when I wrote about it. Yeah, it's
And
wonderful to mention.
where you mentioned, so many times in the novel, you mention about women passing the jewelry, and how the all the women and sisters, they have made sure that the girl, she is empowered because she's got that jewelry. Uh,
Right.
I
That's the only thing women could have at the time, I think, until maybe 1950s or so. Maybe women had inheritance rights, but that was the pin money, the dowry, and that was the woman's. The man could not touch that, or if he did, it was a great shame and scandal. So yeah, jewelry is my mother loved jewelry. So I think about I think I thought about that too, but how it's sort of bred in the bone of Indian women that I'm going to pass something down to my daughter. I don't have anything else to give. I can, though, give her my jewelry because that's mine. I don't have to ask anyone. Yeah. So,
and we have the term here istri dhan. Uh,
yeah.
but it's for the very first time I've seen it in a novel, and it's not just like facts here or there. If I may use the term in Hindi, जैसे वो खुशबू बिखेरी हुई है तो वो जेवर, लेकिन वो जैसे the spirits are blessing the child, and she always has something, the girl child there. So I found it really beautiful, and especially when the anklets are there. And when Prem sees that pic and everything falls into place. So when you talked about that picture in your home, which you don't know about, but you can feel the warmth there. So it's very understandable. Pushpinda ma'am has just switched on her video. Ma'am, you want to say something else you would like to add?
मैंने कहा कि दर्शन कर भी लें, करा भी लें।
Hello.
ठीक है, चलो, ओके, goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. और बहुत बहुत ही beautiful, really. And this jewelry thing really struck me, that you know how we, and I also have my great grandmother's bangles.
Yeah.
So now I look at it very differently, and my that is my parnani, I would say, that is my mother's mother. I have her bangles, and now every time when I look at them, I look at them very differently.
Yeah.
And these were the Raj times she wore them.
Must have been chunky.
No, they are very simple. Strangely, they had the design is very minimalist, but heavy. So we don't wear it. We keep it in the bank lockers, but very minimalistic. That is it. We bond over generations. And do you ever think, like, your next book is also Homeland Blues is also about a lot of history and politics and the social political scene. Do you ever think of writing a women's novel, or a novel centering on women characters without this historical background, just a social thing? If you have any idea about, your novel reminded me of Curses in Ivory by Anjana Basu. It is again based in Bengal, and it's about 3-4 generations of women. And but it was it is popular. Okay, yeah. So do you feel that you might at any point of time write simply about women without the socio-historical background?
Yeah, I can. Actually, Homeland Blues is not that much about history. It's about contemporary times and politics in these times in India and in the US, in a way that's connected by the protagonist's life and her experience. So you might say I'm writing about just an ordinary woman and her, her life, her loves, her disappointments. So I think that's all I can do. I don't think I can do what, say, Jhumpa Lahiri does. And, it's like she's like Jane Austen. I mean, it's so minimalist. I am not minimalist. I kind of have to flair a little bit. So it would be an act of great economy for me to write a kind of social manners type of novel. But who knows? Maybe I will someday. But
And yes, when you were talking about your novel being translated into cinema, it struck me. It is going to make a very fine web series.
oh,
It is so episodic, and the way you present the scenes, it's like editing a film. A film has been edited, and again there is certain flashback or maybe some hint of music. The epiphanies are like some music there which reminds you, oh, this is related to somewhere there. So a web series would really be good, because the length and the breadth of the novel is so much that a 3-hour film, I don't think a director would be able to do justice to it. So
well, I'm ready whenever someone is. But yeah, thank you.
इला मैम मैं एक बात पूछना चाह रही थी.
हाँ, डॉक्टर रितु भनौत हमारे हिंदी के हेड ऑफ द डिपार्टमेंट. और हाँ जी,
Hi, Dr. Bhanot.
हाँ, गुड मॉर्निंग मैम। पहले तो मुझे आपको बहुत सारी मुबारकबाद देनी है। आपने इतनी खूबसूरती से अपनी बात कही और एक नए नज़रिए से हमने चीज़ों को समझने की कोशिश की। मेरे जो एक आप कह लीजिए जिज्ञासा है, एक प्रश्न है, वो हिंदी साहित्य के संदर्भ में है क्योंकि मैं हिंदी से जुड़ी हूँ और मैंने ये देखा है कि हिंदी साहित्य में क्योंकि ज़्यादातर पहले लेखक पुरुष होते थे और पुरुष अपनी कहानी भी और औरतों की कहानी दोनों अपने नज़रिए से ही बयान करते थे। 20वीं शताब्दी के बाद हिंदी में महिलाओं का वर्चस्व बढ़ा, उनका दखल बढ़ा और उन्होंने चीज़ों को अपनी ज़ुबान में कहना और अभिव्यक्त करना शुरू किया। तो उसके बाद का जो साहित्य है 20वीं शताब्दी के बाद का, हम उसमें एक खास विभाजक रेखा देखते हैं। उससे पहले का साहित्य जो पुरुषों ने लिखा और उसके बाद का साहित्य जब महिलाओं ने अपनी बात अपनी तरह से कही। तो मेरा सवाल इस बात से जुड़ा हुआ है कि क्या अंग्रेजी साहित्य में भी ऐसा होता था या ऐसा होता रहा है? क्योंकि वो मैं एक खास लिहाज से जानना चाहती हूँ। हिंदी के लिहाज से तो मैं उस बात को अच्छे से जानती हूँ, लेकिन अंग्रेजी साहित्य में क्या ऐसा हुआ है? क्योंकि आपका जो नॉवल है, वो स्त्री विमर्श को एक नए तरह से, जैसे सिस्टरहुड को हम भगिनीवाद कहते हैं हिंदी में, तो उसको एक नई परिभाषा देता है। तो मैं थोड़ा-सा इस बात के बारे में आपसे जानना चाह रही थी।
Gee, I can't answer in Hindi, but I will answer that in
Please.
English,
Yeah.
if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay, okay.
It did happen in the West, in England certainly, but it happened earlier. It happened in the 18th century when women first started writing in England and publishing. And initially they were dismissed and um, not considered meaningful writers, because largely because they were writing about women's lives and women's concerns and domestic affairs. I mean, Jane Austen is a successor to a lot of women who before her for 100 years had been writing similar kinds of stories, novels, etc., just not with that much finesse, some of them. But there were many, many women in the 18th century who broke through the barrier against women writing, in spite of the fact that men made fun of them, they ridiculed them, they, basically maligned their work, slandered them. But yes, that did happen, and that was a huge change. I mean, the novel form changed because of women and the way they started envisioning the structure and the story of the novel in English literature. That's a very, very astute observation and comparison. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's a great question.
And
Well, I don't want to keep you all too long. So, whenever you're ready,
no, it's been such a pleasure, and for me, it's what for the very first time I'm interacting with a writer in diaspora, writer, somebody who's written on the British Raj, on women, and it is so enlightening to hear about the creative process, because till now it was just my interpretation or what I had read about the works that I would get to know, or maybe when the writer, especially Divakarni, when she gives interviews, we come to know about her insights. But the way we have got this information and we have got to know it, Love's Garden feels like our very own. If
oh, I am so very happy to hear that. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for gathering at 9 in the morning and coming and reading my book and commenting and thinking about it. I am very honored. It's been really wonderful. So thank you, Dr. Rathor, for organizing this.
And thank you so
It was
much.
a pleasure talking to you too.
Oh, the same here, and thank you so much. And first, let me thank you for replying to my message on the very first instant. I had not expected it.
Oh, I was happy to do it, and I really enjoyed it.
So, पुष्पिंदर मैम, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, बस
ठीक है,
वैसे ही ऑन करा मैंने।
अच्छा, ठीक है। तो आई
इनका अलविदा करने के लिए तो फिर हो जाए ना।
बिल्कुल। और उनको अलविदा कहने का हमारा बिल्कुल भी मन नहीं कर रहा है। And we look forward to Homeland Blues coming out soon, and we having a session on Homeland Blues very soon. So wishing you a great year, and wishing you a lot of great things in future. Nandini ma'am, thank you so much, and thanks everyone who have joined hands in making this session so successful. My colleagues on the department and on the departments of Punjabi and Hindi, and we have got Dr. Leena Gupta here from economics, and so many of our colleagues who are from different subjects right here, and we have got teachers and research scholars from across the Tri-City, Chandigarh, Mohali, and Panchkula. So, so many of
I am very honored. Thank you so much.
so, and because this account can only have 100 participants, so I think some of them missed out on it. No doubt, next time we are going to have a bigger session, and definitely anytime you're in India, we look forward that you might just plan a trip to Chandigarh, and
I
we
would love to.
meet
I've
here,
never been to Chandigarh.
and we would like to host you. We would
I would be.
definitely like to host you, Professor Nandini.
Who
Okay,
knows when we'll ever be able to travel again? But if when I do go to
yeah,
India, I
yeah.
would love to get in touch and see if.
Yes. So thank you so much, and namaskar. And with this, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. So you get to hear some of the purest Hindi and Punjabi from here.
It was
And
lovely.
Okay, Sat Sri Akal.
oh,
Bye. Bye bye.
bye bye.
Goodbye.